Good morning. I'm recording this on a very grey day full of damp and drizzle, and so I thought we'd sparkle a little bit today, cheer ourselves up. I'm here to talk to you about aspiring to inspire, and to me it is such an important subject. Learning to teach is a journey. It's a journey that takes a few years in the classroom after you've qualified as a teacher. But then we still may need to move on. We need to move ourselves forward. I didn't realise how much as a young teacher. We weren't given the opportunity to observe other teachers. We didn't know how good this teacher or that teacher actually was. It wasn't until I became an advisor for Kirklees local authority in the 1990s that I learnt a lot more. We had a team day. There were 60 of us, inspectors and advisors, and it was led by the head of service. We discussed schools and we did general work, and then we had an input from him. And he asked us as a team to sit quietly and recall the most inspirational teacher who'd ever taught us when we were at school, whether it was primary school or secondary school. And we all sat quietly and reflected. And do you know, the sad thing is that I could not find one inspirational teacher in all my years at school, not primary, not secondary, and I was the only person in the service who couldn't find one. Then we were asked to think again quietly about the qualities that teacher had. What was it about that teacher that made us say they were the most inspirational person in their learning to be an adult? And then we sat and discussed what we'd found with each other. And finally, in groups, we fed back those qualities to the head of service, and he recorded them on a flip chart. It was an amazing experience because those qualities were generic qualities about the person themselves, not that they were the best person in the world at maths or the best person in the world to teach PE. I've done that activity many, many times with teachers all over the United Kingdom and in other parts of the world. And the answers that teachers come up with are always the same. Here are some of the qualities that teachers list when they're thinking about the most inspirational teacher in their pupil years. Words are usually words like, the person was usually full of fun and laughter. We can't always be full of fun and laughter, and it's not our job to be the class comedian. But it is great to laugh, and I've always said, and my little saying is, if you're laughing, you're learning. So I have consciously tried to use laughter in my lessons and in my presentations. And that ties into another of the qualities that people always say, had a strong sense of humour, which meant that they not only told funny stories or made us laugh, but they also could laugh with us if one of us said something funny and we weren't criticised for it. One of the very important qualities, although people use different words for it, is that they identified, and I identified, that they cared for us and about our learning. They wanted us to do well. Sometimes they said they were ambitious for us, which is a very important quality. Another was that they trusted us and we trusted them. And I think trust is important. We have to be sure that even when we're having a not so good day, the others will understand that and support us. was very interested to see that we often got the answer that they were anecdotal. They were willing to tell little stories from their past that were relevant to whatever we were learning about. They were happy to break off from the lesson and follow another thought that was relevant to what we were learning. That's an important point, and I'll come back to it. They listened to us. We had pupil voice. That's important, isn't it? The teacher was willing to listen to what we had to say, even if it was not exactly what they had expected to hear. And they showed us respect. And in return, we respected them because they made us feel good about ourselves. Whatever was going on in the rest of our lives at that time, they raised our morale. Whatever the words or terminology, the teacher's feedback, the list almost always means the same as these things. And I find that amazing. And that's when I say to you, when were you last that teacher? When did you last do that in the classroom? Which lesson last week was like that for you if you're a classroom teacher? Not just for you, but for the pupils you're teaching. I have always said to teachers, imagine your child is in your class and say to yourself, would that lesson have been good enough for my child? And if it's not good enough for my child, it's not good enough for any child. The activity at Kirklees led me to reflect on when I am as close as I can be to being this inspirational teacher. And I think I have fairly often got close when I'm teaching my beloved English, or art, or history, if it's one of the periods of history that I enjoy teaching, or physical geography, or PE. That might surprise you, but I love teaching PE, and I consider myself to be an okay PE teacher. Teaching 4 rules in maths is almost never inspirational, but I did love teaching data handling and graphs, those sorts of things. But when it came to shape, space and measures, I was defeated. What's that about? Do you know, I was petrified of it. I could not see a purpose to teaching hectagons and octagons and polygons. They're all gone. They're never there. My brain refuses to save them because it doesn't see a point in them. So as a Year 6 teacher, at that point of the year in the curriculum, I had to arrive early and get the old textbook out, and I stood at the whiteboard and I drew all these shapes and I wrote their names across the middle and I wrote the title and I wrote the date, and then I turned on the body language and I stood as the class came in, scowly face, and the whole body said, don't ask me one question, because if it's not on the whiteboard, I don't know it. And I said, copy that down. And then I could tick in my curriculum book, shape and space, all done. And the next year, they were gone again, and I had to do it all again. And then, of course, there's design and technology. I remember clearly, I was teaching in a Bradford middle school in a city when the first national curriculum orders dropped through the letterboxes starting in 1989. And one of the last to arrive was this brand new subject, design and technology. None of us had ever heard of it. What on earth was it? It had been thought up by some person to confound us poor teachers at the time. Prior to that, we'd always taught art and craft, and I loved art and craft. I mean, I am the expert at how many things you can make with the inside of a toilet roll or of paper towel. But when I tried to read this design and technology document, I didn't understand a word of it. It was complete nonsense to me, and I was relieved that I was actually head of English and I didn't have to teach this D&T stuff. It wasn't long since I'd returned to England with my 2 young teenagers and had become a single parent. And after 5 very happy years in the Bradford school, I realised that I needed to move nearer home so that I could be home soon after my children arrived home from their school in order to be able to manage whether they should go out or not. And so I looked in the TES and there was a job at a primary school on the edge of Kirklees, just 10 minutes from my house. Perfect. And it was a job for assessment, and that was my specialism. Double perfect. So I applied and I was called for an interview. When I went into the staff room, there were 5 men sitting there, all suited and booted with collars and ties, looking so important. I felt sure I had no chance of this job at all. But my turn came and I went in and went through the interview, and the head and the chair of governors did the questioning. The questions were perceptive and searching, but I enjoyed them. I knew the answers. I knew what I would recommend for a school as assessment coordinator. We completed the interview and the chair of governors started those age-old words, if you were offered the job, would you? And the head said, one moment please, I've just realised we have another question for Mrs. Wilson. Mrs. Wilson, we would need you to coordinate another subject besides assessment. Is that all right with you? Why, yes, I said, that would be wonderful. I'd be happy to do it. What's the subject? And he said, well, the subject we need you to coordinate is design and technology. My smile froze. Oh, I said, how wonderful. Design and technology. I'd love to. I'm passionate about design and technology. And for 3 years, I crucified that subject in that school. But whilst I did that, another teacher was crucifying my English, and another teacher was crucifying my beloved art. And that's when I realised that subject leadership should not be a matter of inheritance. The last person who left coordinated this, so you need to take it over. It should be about who has the most subject knowledge on the team and who is the most passionate about that subject. Because I had realised, on reflecting about my own teaching, that it's to do with how passionate you feel about a subject and how much subject knowledge you have that enables you to develop and show all those wonderful qualities that lead towards inspirational teaching. When we were part of that team day where we identified the qualities of inspirational teaching, that led me to reflect on another quality that I had consciously developed early in my teaching career, and that's what I call the Robbie Burns syndrome. Robbie Burns wrote a very famous poem. It's called To the Louse, a louse, of course, being a little sort of creature like a flea. In fact, the full title is When Seen on a Lady's Bonnet in Church, which always makes me giggle. And the most famous lines in that poem say, the gift to gie us, to see ourselves as others see us. And when I was trying to establish myself as a reasonably effective young teacher at the beginning of my career, I did it, by watching other teachers, not teaching, we were never given that opportunity, but the way they carried themselves as teachers, the way they moved around the school, the way they interacted with other adults and with the pupils, the confidence they exumed, and the clothes that they wore, the whole demeanour as a professional person. And then I found I could start to watch myself. I could hover up there above myself. This sounds ridiculous, doesn't it? But it's so true. I can look down and I can see what I'm looking like. I can see myself now. I know how I'm sitting. I know whether the body language is open and warm or whether it's cold and barriered and resentful. I know whether my eyes are sparkling or dull. I know whether there's a small smile on my face or whether I'm scowling. And I started to watch myself as I moved around the classroom and interacted with my classes, and as I presented the knowledge and as I questioned them. And I found that really helped me to improve my skills as a young teacher. It was through that and through the training with the Kirklees Local Authority that I realised the key skills to develop inspirational teaching are to be passionate about the subject and to have infinite subject knowledge, so that it doesn't matter if children distract you or you go off task or you suddenly think of something that would be more relevant for the children. It's great to have a plan. I always have a plan for my lesson, but I'm always happy to go off plan. Not that I'm saying I'm inspirational, but I strive to be as close to it as I can be. In the year 2000, when I returned to England and had to re-enter the education world after being part of starting a wonderful school from scratch in Qatar in the Middle East, I felt at 56 I might not get the job I'd like to get in a school, and instead I decided to start my own consultancy with great encouragement from my daughter. In the early days of an independent consultant, as an experienced Ofsted inspector, booked one inspection each half term to help to guarantee the income until the consultancy hopefully took off. But I also trained as an advanced skills teacher assessor, an AST assessor, which were very prevalent skills at that time. That became another contract every half term that I really, really enjoyed, because an AST assessor has to be able to identify the difference between the teacher they're observing being very good or actually being inspirational. ASTs need to be inspirational so that they can lead and guide others in the profession while still working in the classroom. And I made many wonderful visits to schools and watched some delightful teachers, all of them very good, or they wouldn't have been put forward for AST status, but many of them also actually inspirational. And I was always ready to draw the line between the two and explain what the difference was. And I remember clearly going to this inner city school, and I went up to the classroom. Someone took me up there and entered the classroom, and the children were already in, and they were sitting and they were quite quiet. They were chatting softly. And at the back of the room, there was an empty chair, and I thought, well, that must be for me. So I went to sit down, and I was getting myself organised, got out the clipboard, you know, and the form I had to fill in, and I was starting to put the teacher's details, and he still wasn't in the room. There was no other adult in the room. The children weren't misbehaving, but there was quite a bit of chatter. And I'm thinking to myself, I have to admit this, typical man. Oh dear. Still nobody came, and I'm writing on the form. 2 minutes in, nobody's arrived, and suddenly the door burst open, and this man strolled in, and he strolled over to his desk, and he started shuffling papers. And I thought, oh dear, and I'm back on the clipboard writing away. And all of a sudden, the biggest boot I've ever seen in my life flew through the air and hit the wall just a couple of feet to the side of my head. And I shot up and the whole room was silent, and he started his lesson. And the point of the lesson was the unexpected always catches our attention. And it was a wonderful lesson. It was funny, it was informative, it really appealed to the students, and I learnt a lot too, which is not to prejudge people. Sometimes they're setting the scene. So the message I'm giving you is that just as it's a journey that we travel when we're learning to become a teacher, a confident teacher, an articulate teacher, it's also a journey to continue to strive every year to be a better teacher and a better teacher, aiming towards that wonderful goal of being an inspirational teacher, increasing our subject knowledge and increasing our passion. And I've been fortunate enough recently to publish my own book through Olympia Publishing. It's Just a Journey with Ros, and that tells many of the stories about my journey as I strove to become a better teacher. And one of the stories that I love the most is the story of Stan Wilcox, who was right back in the very, very first school, Normanton Secondary Modern, that I taught in at the beginning of my career. And that's when I was watching the teachers. That was when I was learning to do my Robbie Burns, and I was trying to base my practice on those who I admired or who the pupils admired. And I could see nothing inspirational in Stan Wilcox. He was an old man to me, and he was a geography teacher. But his classroom was on the way to my art room, and I used to look in, and he was writing copious work on 4 blackboards, which the children sat in silence and copied into their exercise book. And I knew over the weeks and months that no matter how boring that was, and the fact that he never changed it, and that every class of every age copied that same stuff down regardless of the curriculum, yet they never moved. They never spoke. They were never disruptive, and it was a challenging secondary modern school. And I wondered what gift it was that Stan had that I could add to my portfolio. And one day, I was just leaving the staff room to return to my art room after a free period. We used to get them in secondary schools, not in primary in those days, when the deputy head teacher, Basher Burgess, that's another story, came out of the office, and he said, "Oh, Mrs. Wilson, could you just pop in to Mr. Wilcox and ask him to come down to the office, please? I need a word with him." And I said, "Of course, Mr. Burgess." So I went down and I knocked on Stan's door, and I said, "Excuse me, Mr. Wilcox, but Mr. Burgess would like to see you. Would you like me to sit in with your class for a few minutes while you go, so that I can manage them for you? I'm not due for my next art lesson yet." And he said, "Nay, lass, that won't be necessary." And he reached up and he took out his left eye and he placed it on the pile of books on his desk. And he said to the class, "Now don't move, it's watching thee." And he sailed out of the classroom. So my message to you all today is, thank you for listening. I hope you found a little sparkle in the messages. You need the passion. You need the subject knowledge, and above all else, you need a glass eye. Thank you.